Well, exactly a week today, the morning of June 29, 2018, former Vice President and Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Pakwesi Bekwin Amissah-Arthur, collapsed at the Air Force gym during a workout session and died shortly after at the 37 military hospital. Following the death of the former Vice President, the President Akufo-Addo ordered that all flags fly at half-mast for 5 days. The President also announced the full state burial for the Vice President, the former Vice President. A book of condolence has been opened at the Accra International Conference Center and all Ghana High Commissions. Former Vice President Pakwesi Amissah-Arthur was born in Cape Coast in the Central Region, April 1951. On August 6, 2012, he was sworn in as the Vice President of Ghana and served in that position until January 7, 2017. Many are yet to come to terms with the sudden death of the former Vice President, especially when we are told that he was healthy as he joined a vehicle to the Air Force gym for a very familiar session, something that he does almost every morning. Well, we thought that exactly 1 week of his passing will bring him somebody who knew him better than most of us and tell us about the man that we've lost. Joining us this morning for a conversation is former Finance Minister, Mr. Seth Terkper. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you for making time.
To your viewers.
Sure. First of all, I want to find out how you received the news of the passing of the former Vice President.
Thank you very much. I received it from Joy FM. Initially, I'm in Joy Studios. In the morning, I normally listen to the radio. More of radio. And so I listened to the news, the business news, I believe. And just before the newspaper review, the breaking news, came in. Obviously, it was a complete big shock. So I, made a couple of, calls, visited the house, which I knew very well, and it's true that we had lost, a very prominent and respectable, citizen.
But you worked with him for many years.
Yes, I worked with him. I would say he was one of those who developed me professionally. I'm proud to say that. And that's because from day one, when I completed my national service and was employed by Customs, but worked at the National Revenue Secretariat, which is now, you may call it GRA. That was the formative years of the Ghana Revenue Authority when the revenue institutions were removed from the Ministry of Finance and made them autonomous instead of being departments. He was Deputy Minister already in charge of budgets, and I worked with Mr. Tuahoy, who was the Secretary responsible for the National Revenue Secretariat. And so obviously they are friends, very close. And so I got into that network. I got quite close to a minister after national service because the National Revenue Secretariat was a small organization. About 19, I believe, of us were there. And
so that was more like a family.
More like a family, and also gave me a lot of insight into policy and to know, people like Mr. Amissah-Arthur, because we had a privilege of being in meetings. And then when the structural adjustment program started, I was assigned to the secretariat, which brought me, much closer. So this is how close it is from the beginning, and then it continued. And professionally, I have to say that I was a national coordinator for the VAT when it was introduced. And the person who told me that I was going to be the national coordinator after I had returned from my postgraduate was the late Amissah-Arthur.
So he hired you?
On a Sunday. My employer. And it was on a Sunday. And that's because we lived close to the sister. So he always came by. And anytime he came by, he would pass by the house, to say hello to our young family. So he said, we are recalling you from leave to come and take up that assignment. I remember that afternoon very well, as after church we sat down. And then my relationship with him continued.
What kind of person, he came across as a very quiet, a man of few words, but also funny because he would make you laugh sometimes.
Yes.
Beyond what we know, I mean, you were really close. What kind of person was he?
Well, I think you've described him, even from afar. Yes, he's very serious, man of, few words, as you rightly said. But in the inner circle, he displayed a lot of intellect and a lot of, understanding, of issues. Yes, he's humorous. Part when you get close to him is exactly what most people who probably don't get close to him or don't see him in a setting where he's, telling jokes and things, may not know, that part of him, but it's a very, very humorous, person. But I think for the nation, we've lost a professional who took his job, seriously. And I'm not saying that to ingratiate, him because and I'm not saying that also because when you are close to somebody, you have differences, professional, views and whatever. But the thing about him is you debated it and that was it. It doesn't affect, the relationship. And so that is what I would wish as a nation we remembered of him, because he and Dr. Butchie, Mr. Hoy and others took up the economic, management of the country when things were tough. We were coming out of, the coup era, the champion, the first phase of it, where, like today, inflation, control pricing and whatever, and we had to change. And I always say, to their credit, that team which I worked, that it's been since 1983 when the Structural Adjustment Program was launched, Economic Recovery Program. Whatever you may think about structural adjustment, whatever you may think of fund involvement, bank involvement, World Bank involvement in our economy, Ghana has not experienced negative growth since, from 1985 when we stopped the negative growth. We used to go up and down, so even in tough times. So it tells you the fundamentals, which, they put in place by finding somewhere in the middle where we could continue with being welfare, economy. Of course, they are left of center thinkers, but also bring in some infusion of, market discipline.
Was his life all about figures and numbers?
No, as I said, he had friends. He went out. He exercised. I also know from, knowing him early and later through my marriage to a Methodist, the staunch Methodist. And privilege, it was at our wedding, me and my wife. And I got to know, that part of him, very active in the church, very active socially. I believe that the parents even put up, a senior high school, which he was dedicated even as. At the time he was vice president, I recall we had a conversation where he went back. So he had many parts. He wasn't just numbers as many would say. But that is his, having said that, that's his biggest contribution.
Yeah.
To it.
But he also worked as governor of the Bank of Ghana. And indeed, when he was nominated as vice president, subsequently becoming vice president, a lot of us thought, oh, here's somebody coming from strictly like a corporate environment coming into politics. But he had been in politics way before that.
Yeah, as I said, he was a deputy minister. And even when he left government, and when the NDC lost, he was a consultant. And I had the privilege of working with him because I then moved, to the IMF. I was doing a number of assignments in West Africa and East Africa. That was my first assignment when I joined the IMF. And he was with a consulting firm called Sigma, and they were in the sub-region and often. So I would come and we would have, conversations and engagement. So he continued to be a professional. And that's probably the corporate side, the private side we are talking about. But he took up that after many years in public, service and supporting, the economic management. Yes, and when he became governor, I must say that we became even closer at a higher level of economic management. For me, he had already experienced that. That's because as deputy minister, we worked with the central bank, but I was on the board, on his board, which he chaired, you know, and so the advantage you will see clearly was somebody who had worked on the fiscal side, who knew the fiscal as deputy minister, so he could, you know, marry and see the links between the fiscal side of the economy, which has to do with taxes, spending, and others, with the monetary side, which has to do with foreign exchange management. And you could see how he managed the blend. And one of his attributes, I would say, is remaining calm.
What's that?
Calm. When, you know, most people are agitated around him, you know, then he would joke with calm everybody, and, you know, stick to, you know, what is the solution, you know, and that is what a deep thinker, you know, you listen around the table, and he's a very good listener. You know, I would say even from a very early days, as you know, as somebody who was just from national service and coming in. He was already a lecturer coming in from the university. Yeah, so.
What was he doing after the NDC lost?
He went to office. Again, like the first time, he had an office at East Legon. And I must say that the last time I saw him, I was traveling, so I had gone to see him. I hadn't seen him in a while, so I went to the house. And I was told that he had gone to the office, but he could come. He's likely to come home, you know, for lunch. And so I went to a nearby, where I also worked, nearby office, and his bodyguard came and said, the old man is in. So he says, you should come. I mean, that's how easy he is. So I walked in. You know, I went in with that appointment anyway, you know, because I had known him. No, because I was going, but we sat down. You know, I must say I even delayed his lunch because we sat down, you know, for about an hour. So, and I'm talking about barely 10 days before he died, because I was away for only a short period. And we sat down and spoke, and, you know, and so I said, I was. I didn't want to take too much of his time. He said, I work on my own now. You know, so we started talking, and obviously it's spanned the economy, the party, you know, the state of the party, and various things that, you know, he was doing. So I was to meet him, you know, on my return, because, yeah, so as I normally do.
And that meeting never happened?
It never happened, yes.
Do you know what his ambitions were after being vice president? Did he ever talk about what he wanted to do afterwards?
Not really. Our conversations didn't go there. I wouldn't be surprised, because it's been barely a year, maybe not a year and a half, you know, of the loss, and everybody sticking through, you know, like most people. But his dedication, as I said, he went to work. The professional side always showed that.
But the political side, was he going to get on the ticket with John Dramani Mahama, for instance?
I'm not sure about that. Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure about that. And those decisions are usually decisions which are quite close to, you know, the flag bearer and others. And President Mahama is still the flag bearer, so you know, to follow processes and wait, you know, for some offense for the opportunity. So you don't. I mean, as a courtesy, you know, go into those kind of issues in a discussion where. But because I had known him, there was a lot to talk about. Sure. You know, but if he had some intention, probably he would have volunteered it. But maybe he was still thinking around things.
We heard about how it was very difficult to break the news to his mother, for instance. His death has also generated quite a number of conversations. Without getting into the details, would you say this has been appropriate? I mean, the kind of conversations that we're having, it is appropriate that we must have these conversations?
I think marrying the tradition with, not just tradition, but decorum sometimes, with instant news, you know, is a thing. You know, normally, even when, you know, defer to the family, close members, the wife, old mother, and what, siblings. And I know his siblings. I knew Jabesh, who, when I put on the power hat, became my advisor. So that's how close. I'd known him professionally, but then, close. And he gave me a lot of insights as an engineer into the power sector, and the petroleum sector. But when such a news happened, how do we break it? I don't know. I would leave that to the media commission and others as well, because everybody is hearing it on air. I don't know how we strike the balance. As I said, this is the age of instant news.
Sure.
Where so I think maybe I could imagine that myself. He had left home, gone to the gym. I could imagine maybe his wife preparing breakfast or something for his return, which is true. When I went there, breakfast was the tables were being cleared when I went very early. Then
after you heard the news.
After I heard the news, as I said, I was among the early people. I didn't go immediately, but I went, within a reason with my former deputy at Force, who is now the ranking member. And I considered myself being close, to the family. The wife knew me very well. So when we went, you could see that it was a home environment. And you could see people were already around the place. Even the media, as I went in, was already there. But they were now clearing the dining table and the dining area. I saw it visibly. So even that an hour or so for preparation to receive visitors, they didn't have that opportunity. That's the sort of thing. And you mentioned an agent mother, who is, has intellect. What I mean is she's professional in her own right. The wife is a professional. So the scenario I was painting, which I don't know, was it's possible that the radio probably was on because the wife is very current and probably would have received the news, that way. I don't know how she, she received it, but, and so there was attempt to shield, people and all that, yes. And I tried to get, my first, call went to Jabesh, but it was clear that his phone was engaged. But again, like the family, he got back in a test. I'll get back to you.
There's another kind of conversation going on now, and just to have a feel of what, because the former vice president was quite current. He would comment about things that were happening. What would he have said about this fallen city?
This is somebody who went through the city and what the city as a deputy minister, right, as somebody close to economic management, as governor, right, and as chairman of the economic management team. And when I went through the city issues after taking office somewhere in 2013, there was the 2012, 2013 because of the problems that we had and the, especially when the crude oil prices fell and our exports revenue just cut, from crude oil, gold, cocoa prices. He was, as I said, calm, immediately convenes meetings and whatever. What he would have said would be his calm self, I believe, but I don't want to speculate because I had already come up, and said, that we are seeing a situation where we need a consensus, with certain economic issues, from debt management to whether we are going to borrow or not, whether a nation can live without borrowing, whether, you can manage the economic fundamentals without looking at the cocoa season, without the dry season, before the lean season come in, because cocoa still, dominates. Whether there's a magic wand for these things, I believe he would have been contemplating those things because he, came in for a lot of criticism during the election, period, for his role as governor and economic management team, vice president, when the simple solutions were being proposed. So I could imagine that he was, being a reflective man that he is. He would be looking at it professionally, and I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if he was doing some consulting, which I believe he probably given his where he had got to, maybe consulting at a very high level. So this may be some of the issues which were engaging him, not just for Ghana, but probably for, for other countries, the professional that's...
Two things. The criticisms that you make reference to, did it ever get to him?
I said the man's attribute is, I think there was only one occasion I recall when he commented in public and responded. But his demeanor is always to remain, calm and, look to solutions. It's a great attribute. I mean, not losing his cool as people would get agitated. It's very much, as I said, I'm not saying that to flatter somebody who is, I think a lot of people know that about him. So his would have been a reflective one. And knowing him again and again, I wouldn't be surprised if he was probably, he had worked at the central bank. So probably looking at the numbers, he knows, the publications and, whatever. And maybe putting partisanship aside and talking to people in the background as we normally do, because you have friends on the other side. And so despite what goes on, the deep partisanship in public, there is discussions and conversations, maybe a classmate, from first people, somebody calling and they are talking in the background with some humor and other things. Yeah, that would definitely be going on. But he hadn't commented in public, whether he would have done or somebody would have interviewed him. Yes.
What would you remember him for?
I would remember him from two perspectives. I would remember him for his contribution to the country, which is what I would wish was acknowledged of somebody who a lot of people misunderstood. His dedication to economic management. It's, as I said, started as Dr. Butchie's deputy during those periods, and taking the country through transitions to middle-income country, which he understood. I remember very well when the rebasing was done, and I went to his office, we were having discussions. And he was the first to say, Seth, let's pause. He calls me Seth. Let's pause for a moment, for a few weeks and see. And the reason is that the per capita which determines that you're a middle-income country is dividing your GDP by the population to determine the amount per individual. And when it is above $1,005, that's when the country per individual is considered a middle income. So if you and me sitting here, they were to share the national wealth, and we each get literally $1,005, dollars, then we have become middle income. Okay. But he saw that the census was coming, and the census would increase the population, and therefore the first calculation was being done dividing a low population, because it's obvious that the census would lead to. So he said, let's pause and wait, so that we can do a proper analysis. That's how, perceptive. I remember that conversation. So that's the economic side. But the personal side, for my personal professional development, there's no question that, very early in the formative years, he played a role, a very important one, together with Dr. Butchie, Mr. Atoa, who was my immediate, boss, and others, and that was a very close-knit, economic management team. And I would remember very, very much their support, that group, including Professor Mills, during the Kumipreko era. Today the VAT has stabilized, but I think those who lived in the Kumipreko era would see what it meant to introduce a tax like VAT, which 30th anniversary happens to be this year. So that tells you about, the perception of that group, even against all odds to put something in place, because VAT has become the main stabilizer for the economy. And the base was very narrow, and we needed to broaden the base of our consumption taxes. So I like to, to pay tribute to, for me, for his, involvement in my professional development, until, he You know, he passed away. As I said, I've spoken to him much. You know, but I like the nation to remember him as somebody who has contributed, you know, from a very difficult time to, we are still facing some difficulties, but I think those who remember the shortages and others, you know, that era would not be comparing where we are. And it will be to his credit, you know, that we continue and strengthen the party, strengthen the country.
Finally, Mr. Terkper, the president announced that flags should fly at half-mast for 5 days. There's a book of condolence that's been opened. How should the nation mourn him?
I think remember him for what he did for the country. He was somebody who always promoted bipartisanship. I said during the period when he was in private practice, there was a meeting that was held to get a national consensus. And it wasn't surprising as vice president that he organized Senchi to get a national consensus. You remember? So playing back to his, you know, so he's a consensus builder. He's somebody who wants consensus on national issues. And so that's his contribution. But for young people in particular, I would say that this is somebody you can look to, because he assumed responsibility at a very, you know, young age. If you look at his age now and you know, go back and you look at what it means to reach there, you know. And so I would hope that he will be an inspiration, you know, for young people, and to know that, you know, there is always a long-term, you know, goal, and you have to have a very long-term goal, you know, as he did.
Thank you, Mr. Terkper, for sharing. Thank you for telling us about a man whom we lost exactly a week ago, the former Vice President, Parkwesi Bekwing Amissah-Arthur. May his soul rest in peace. Stay with us.
It's been a privilege.